Hello and welcome to the first episode of Back to Beverly, a podcast series bringing the best, brightest, and most successful Beverly Hills High School alumni back to campus to engage in a thoughtful discussion reflecting on their days as a Norman. They'll share what they learned that helped prepare them for future success in their careers and offer guidance and tips for listeners. I'm your host, Dillon Curtis, Beverly High class of 2010, and I'm glad to have you along for this journey. Now, before we get to my first interview, I'd like to provide a bit of background on this podcast and how it came to be. When I was at Beverly, already over 10 years ago, I was active on KBEV, Beverly High's very own TV station, the Norman News, which is the longest-running student-produced news show in the country, and even hosted my own, albeit short, TV series, Back to Beverly. I interviewed the sitting mayor of Beverly Hills, the publisher of the Beverly Hills Weekly, the head of Rogers & Cowan PR, and even a California Superior Court judge, all of whom once walked the halls of this great high school. While I wish I had conducted more interviews at the time, as with most teenagers, I was focused on other things, and 4 years at Beverly quickly came and went. However, since graduation, I've had a desire to bring back the program in one shape or form, and thus the birth of this podcast in 2022. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review, subscribe, and send it to a friend. With that said, here's Andy Licht. So, I think we're ready to go then, Mr. Carey, is that right? Cool, I'm getting the thumbs up from the control center. So I'm really excited to be here with my first guest, successful Hollywood film producer who was credited on some of the biggest blockbusters in the 90s. You've probably seen one of his films, including The Cable Guy with Jim Carey and Waterworld with Kevin Costner, among a lengthy list of box office hits. He has since gone on to have a long and rewarding career as a public servant here in Beverly Hills, which is leading him to a run for city council later on this year. Please join me in welcoming current chair of the Beverly Hills Planning Commission and Beverly High grad of class of 75, Andy Licht, to the show. Andy, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
So how does it feel to be back at Beverly? Did you get a little sense of nostalgia walking through the halls?
Absolutely. I was the best 4 years of my life, really. I have such good memories of being here, and you know, you asked me earlier if anything had changed other than the paint, and unfortunately not a lot, but
part of
me,
the charm.
that's a good thing.
Yeah,
yes,
part of the charm.
It is charming. Here. It's my kids went here, and my daughter, her first week, I was asking her where her classes were, and she was trying to explain, and I said, the new building or the old building? She said, they're all old buildings.
Or did she say the science building?
Yeah, no, the science was just being constructed, but I mean, I remember when this building was built, and it's still the new building to me. But
yeah, well, it's funny you say that. So when I've been coming back last couple of weeks to sort of get a feel for the studio and sit down and practice a little bit, and I got to admit, embarrassingly, I got lost my first time back. I parked in the wrong place, I got lost, I all turned around, but probably just I'm getting a little old, I assume.
Is this what I have to look forward to around your age?
I believe so. Well, you mentioned your daughter going to school here, and obviously you have an interesting relationship with Beverly, having graduated from here as well as sent your kids here. Knowing what a great institution Beverly is, was that always the plan to send your kids to school here?
Absolutely. I lived in a home in West LA that happened to be in a really good school district, and my kids at the time were 2 and 4, and I said to my wife, I really want to move back to Beverly Hills because I want my kids to have the same experience I did. And it was quite a stretch for us at the time, but we were able to make it work, and I'm really happy I did.
And I bet they are too, having the experience as well. I mean, I think we were talking before we started recording, but Beverly's so great in that the network that it creates following graduation and as people go on in their careers, and the people that you know as a kid turn out to be, you know, who your friends and your network as an adult.
Absolutely. I mean, my best friend from Beverly, his little sister, who was his little sister when I met her, she was 9, is now a very, very successful entertainment attorney, and fortunately for me, my attorney. And the list is lengthy of Beverly graduates that I run across.
Indeed. So after graduating Beverly, you went on to study economics at Cal Berkeley, go Bears, and then got your master's in fine arts at SC, fight on.
Was it the Peter Stark program that you were in at SC?
It was. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do when I was nearing graduation at Berkeley. I had spent a summer on Wall Street between junior and senior year and loved that, but didn't want to live in New York. And to me, I'd always loved film and television like most people that age. And to me, that's the business of LA. It's, if you live in Pittsburgh, it's steel. If you live in Los Angeles, it's showbiz. And actually, my mom had heard about the Stark program. It hadn't started yet, and she read an article about it, and I applied to that.
So obviously you went into film production following graduation. We'll get to that shortly. But you studied economics at Cal, and then you went and studied film production at SC. It feels like those are the two fields of study that are required to sort of be a film producer. Is that accurate to say?
I don't think so. I think there are lots of great backgrounds. To me, English is always one that stood out because having the ability to write well and communicate is valuable no matter what you do. So I've always encouraged people to be English majors. Of course, my son became a philosophy major, but it's done quite well with that.
It's funny you mentioned writing. It was when I mentioned I'd been in here at the studio last couple of weeks, and Mr. Carey was doing another interview recently. And for those who don't know, Mr. Carey is the head of the production studio here at Beverly and a dear friend. But he was interviewing a director who said, I really wish that I had written before I started directing, because it gives you an idea of how hard that is, right? And to your point of writing in English, just part of the business goes to being successful in the business, I suppose.
I think it's the toughest part of the business to sit down. Well, I used to think with a blank page and a typewriter, but I'm dating myself. But to sit down with a blank screen and create a world, create characters, write dialogue, how do they think? To me, that's the toughest part there is, and they deserve the most credit to me.
I would venture to agree with you, yeah. So anyways, there are obviously a number of well-known films, and I mentioned them in the intro, that you've produced throughout your career, and we'll get to those more in depth shortly. But I'm interested and curious how someone gets a start as a producer in Hollywood. Is it similar to becoming an agent? Do you go work for an already established production company and work your way up, or what was your entry into the business?
So my entry was, my path was a little different than most people. Yeah, working for a production company or a producer is certainly a smart and accepted path. In my era, really the only way, and it was sort of the graduate school, was to start in the mailroom at one of the big agencies. At the time, it was William Morris, CAA, and ICM. And that's how most people got their start. I, as you mentioned, was fortunate enough to get into the Peter Stark program. And it's a long story. I don't know how depth we want to go.
Yeah, give me the 30,000-foot view.
So you had to make films with a partner, and my film partner and I got along quite well. And I had this idea that we knew all these young writers and young directors, and studios at the time, it was really the end of a very bad period of time for the studios, the late 70s. And they were just sort of emerging because of VHS videotape and they were able to resell their libraries. And studios were starting to ramp up. And my idea was to make studios aware of young writers and young directors. And we wrote Jeff Miller is his name. He and I wrote this 3-page business plan that I recently read, was horrified with. But anyway, we came up with this idea, and one of our classes in the Stark program was being taught by a guy named Stan Kamen, who was the most powerful agent in Hollywood at the time.
Wow.
And I went up to him after class and said, I have this idea to try to set myself up and as a producer, bringing in young writers and young directors. Do you think we have a chance? He said, I think it's a great idea. Can I help you?
Yeah.
And Stan became our agent.
Wow.
He represented me and Barbara Streisand. And
incredible list of talent there.
And he set up meetings, and one of them was at Warner Brothers with a man named Frank Wells, who was the vice chair at the time. And he loved it and gave us a deal. So at 23, I had a deal and an office at Warner Brothers.
Jeez. Do you think without the connection to him as your professor, it would have been challenging as such a young man to be taken seriously by the studios with that sort of idea of, nurturing young directors and writers?
Yes, I think it would have been a much more difficult task. He validated us. By the fact that he was representing us and that he told the studio that he would feed us talent, writers and directors, and that helped a lot. I think it could have worked without it, but he definitely greased the pipe.
Yeah, well, that's certainly helpful. My next question is sort of in that realm of your production career. So obviously you get to start as a young man, and then you go on to make a couple huge films in the 90s, including Cable Guy and Waterworld. How do you raise funds for a big blockbuster film? I mean, is it a lot of studio money? Is it a lot of private funds? Are you going through? Does the studio give you a Rolodex and you're making calls and saying, "Hey, we've got this project we're looking to make," or what is sort of the how does a movie get funded?
I love that you call it a Rolodex.
Yeah,
it's my era. So the answer to your question is yes. Those are all the accepted ways. Jeff, my partner, and I, we decided we were going to be studio people, so we didn't go the independent financing route. We only dealt with studios. So, where our attitude was, you could get 50 no's on a project and one yes, and the only thing that mattered was the yes. So that was how the route we chose.
Got it. So then the studio is looking to you, and you're out with your partner sourcing material, and then you're coming to them and saying, "Hey, we've got this film. Here's the budget we think we'd need." Is that?
That's one way.
In the
There's
essence,
all different ways.
Yeah.
You can go in with what's called a treatment, which is 1 page, 20 pages, which is a short story version of a project. We used to go in a lot with pitches, which is like in any business, you pitch the story, you have writers that you think are good and you hope the studio thinks are good, and you pitch a story. The first project we ever sold was with a pitch. Sometimes you'll go in with a completed script. They call them spec scripts. It's when a writer writes a script on speculation of selling it, kind of like a spec house. We sold a number of scripts that way, projects. That was sort of our forte. We carved out a niche for ourselves where we would come up with ideas. We would find writers that we liked, and we'd marry them, and we'd develop spec scripts with them, and that's how we set up a lot of our projects.
Got it. Interesting. So you sort of carved out a little niche for yourself within the larger entertainment world.
Yes.
So given we mentioned the success of the couple big hits in the 90s, we're now in 2022 with the rise of streaming services like Netflix and HBO Max, among others. What are your thoughts on the movie industry today, and do you think the films getting released directly to streaming is a sustainable model given how important a box office is to the success of a film?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So in every technological advancement in the entertainment business, the studios or the establishment kind of freaked out. When television came, everybody thought that was the end of the film business. Like, why would you pay to go see a film in a theater when you can watch things at home?
Right.
And it turned out to be the opposite. It became a new outlet to show films over and over again. The studios made a lot of money. In the late 70s, about 76, 77 is when home video came into the mix, and that was VHS and Beta. And everybody said that was the end of the film business. Why would you go out when you can watch a film on your own TV at home you can go to Blockbuster, or even there were businesses before Blockbuster that did what Blockbuster did, and that was the opposite. It became a huge bonanza for the studios. And then streaming came along, and people were freaked out. The streaming service can stream you a new film that's never been in the theaters, and you can watch it at home. You don't have to pay the babysitter, and you don't have to pay parking and don't have to go out to dinner. And same thing. It's been a huge bonanza. They're very different businesses, though. They, you know, there was either late 60s or early 70s, Barry Diller created the movie of the week. And that's basically what Netflix is. Netflix makes more than 50 films a year, so more than one a week.
Wow.
And some people may argue that the quality isn't as good, but they make a lot of great films.
Sure.
They have some nominated for Academy Awards. So it's a different world. Their model is very different. The old model, when you made a film for a studio and a distributor, is all about the opening weekend. If the box office wasn't good the opening weekend, you were dead. The theaters would pull it off the screen because it's real estate. They only had so many screens.
Right.
Streaming services have unlimited real estate. So what do they care about? They just want to make quality enough product that they keep people subscribing. You're going to subscribe to network as long as there's enough there that you're like, yeah, I enjoy some of it.
Shot. Sure. I do think there will always be a place for the box office, and I hope this, because it is such a nice evening out, and I do think films are meant to be seen on the big screen, surround sound, and I don't know that unless you have a home theater, I don't know that you get that experience watching a film at home. Would you?
I 100% agree with that. It's funny, when I first got to Warner Brothers, the executive that was our executive as producers was a very young guy, and his very first film was a film called Vacation. And he gave me the VHS, and I was there as a sounding board. I was 23, and
Right.
the heart of the film going audience is 16 to 25, so he was very curious what I thought of the film.
Sure.
And I lived with a friend of mine at the time, and we loved those types of comedies.
Yeah.
Couldn't wait to watch it, and we watched it. We didn't laugh once. And we thought, I didn't even know what to tell Mark, and I thought, this is just dumb.
Yeah.
And then we went to the premiere and loved it. And I still to this day love it.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized exactly what you're saying. It's just not the same. Emotions, especially laughter, is contagious.
Right.
And you need the experience of being in a theater.
Yeah. We're very much social beings, I think, and that speaks to that point.
I agree.
So I mentioned Waterworld was one of your big hits in the '90s. And to this day, I was just at Universal recently. But how does it feel that movie became a Universal Studios attraction? Is it cool to sort of see that still around 30 plus years later, when much of the park is turned over?
Yes, it's an interesting question, and it's still to this day the #1 attraction.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's very, very popular, and fortunately we don't share in that. The writer does,
Okay.
fortunately, because he literally did, as I was talking about earlier, created the world from nothing. And the funny thing is, it was sci-fi, and it's only kind of sci-fi now because it's all about the polar ice caps melting and covering the Earth with water.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was going to be another question, was how did you guys sort of foresee that? Did you did you foresee that back in the '90s? Said this is sort of the trajectory. We might as well make a movie about it.
No, I don't think the writer Peter Rader. It was his. The funny thing is, he actually came up with the idea with another Beverly graduate, a guy named Brad Cravoy, and the two of them came up with the idea. It was basically, the idea was Mad Max on water, if you remember an old picture called Mad Max.
Of course.
And that was the basis of the idea. But I don't think any of us ever foresaw the idea of the polar ice caps melting.
Right. And yet here we are today.
Here we are.
So I mentioned Waterworld, I mentioned The Cable Guy, obviously both big in the '90s. We're taping this not long after the Super Bowl, where Jim Carrey obviously reprised his role in a Verizon commercial. How does something like that come about? Did Verizon have to approach you or the studio to get approval? There's some sort of negotiated fee. Were you involved in any way? Just curious how something like that happens.
We weren't involved. The advertising agency, it was done for Verizon. The advertising agency approached Jim, and he said yes. And Jim actually got Ben Stiller involved a little, who directed the picture. And we were not involved. The studio wasn't involved, other than that they got a license fee for it.
Got it.
and it's one of those things that worked on two levels. If you knew the picture, it was fun, and even if you didn't, it was still kind of funny.
Yeah. You know, I watched it recently knowing we were going to do this interview, and I got some good laughs out of it. So, I mean, to this day, it holds up.
I just, sorry to interrupt, but about a year ago, Sony approached me about doing a Cable Guy TV series.
Oh, wow.
So we're working on that now.
Oh, very cool.
In fact, we sent the pilot out to an actor just today.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Well, to everybody listening, you look out for that sometime down the road.
Yeah.
You mentioned Ben Stiller directed the film, and I was talking with my dad before the show about Judd Apatow, and I had read somewhere that he had some involvement with the film. Is that accurate, and is that how his wife ended up in the film? Is there anything?
Very accurate.
Yeah.
So Judd's manager was, he had the same manager as Jim Carey. I didn't know Judd, and I still remember, because it was the first time I'd ever heard the expression. His manager called me, said, "I have an idea for a writer. He's the real deal."
Oh, wow.
Which is now a very common expression.
Right.
Maybe it was in those days, but I had
Sure.
never heard it.
Yeah.
And he said, "I'd like you to meet with him." And we thought he was great, and he had great ideas. And Jim met with him and really liked him. And anyway, Judd and I became very close, and he and I together were casting for the female lead, and we had narrowed it down to 3 women. And I knew he always liked the one who became his wife.
Yeah.
And when she came back for her last interview, before she walked in, he goes, "We went on a date last night." So that's where he met her. And
Oh, wow, amazing.
the rest is history.
That's great. So we've talked a lot about your success as a very young professional. Is there a piece of advice you'd give to someone who's looking to start out in the production realm in entertainment? You know, would you recommend going the traditional route and going to work for a studio, or would you say, hey, the streaming services have sort of disrupted the entertainment industry, maybe give that a shot?
Well, to me, those are sort of the same arena, whether you're working for a streamer or a studio. Getting a shot there is great. Somebody said to me when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do that the entertainment business is like a circus tent, and in many ways, but the idea is to get under the tent, because once you're under the tent, it's easy to move around, but until you're under the tent, you're kind of on the outside. So whatever you can do to get in, is start in a mailroom at an agency, and everybody, including me, thinks it's beneath them. When I was doing it, the agencies would only take people who had graduated from law school or business school. You had to have a graduate degree to deliver mail and make $165 a week. They just get so many applicants for so few spots.
Right. Wow, it's fascinating. So I'd like to sort of pivot the conversation now and talk about what you're spending a lot of your time doing now, which is giving back to the city of Beverly Hills as a public servant, currently as chair of the Planning Commission. It's an appointed position, and how did that come about, and have you enjoyed serving?
It is an appointed position. It's not elected, but the Beverly Hills Courier wrote an article recently and said the Planning Commission, which I'm now the chair of, is the most important commission in the city. It may or may not be, but certainly we make multi-million-dollar decisions. I'm fortunate enough to have my second go-around as chair of the commission, and it's a big job. I mean, right now we've been having meetings about the LVMH, the Louis Vuitton people, who want to build this incredibly beautiful hotel called Cheval Blanc. They have a few around the world, and they want their first one to be in Beverly Hills. And I always kind of chuckle to myself, there are 5 of us, and for whatever reason the chair votes last. And when there are 2-2 votes, I'm thinking, I'm making this decision.
Right.
And it's interesting, but I've really enjoyed it. I knew nothing about land use when I started this, and spent a lot of time learning and really enjoying it.
So you mentioned reviewing a lot of projects in the city, land use wise, and LVMH obviously being a big player, but I imagine there's a lot of projects that come across your desk that are local, that you might know the person proposing them. Does it get a little murky there, where maybe friends of friends or personal friends are putting proposals in front of you, and you have to sort of be an unbiased planning commissioner and think best for the city. Is that tough? Is that challenging?
It is. You can never make everybody happy. The expression goes, "I'm not a taco," but it's you asked that question, and I've done a number of interviews for new commissioners, and we almost always ask that question because it's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. You're very 2 degrees of separation. I remember one meeting in particular, which I won't name. I made a decision against a very good friend of mine, and he screamed at me publicly in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And it was one of these meetings that went till like 1:30 in the morning, and I came home, and my wife, who was half asleep, said, "How'd it go?" And I said, "Well, I don't think we're gonna be friends with so-and-so anymore."
Right.
And we are, but it was uncomfortable. But you make a deal that you're gonna do what they call the greater good, and
right. It's hard for people to remove their emotions, right? I think when you're in a situation like that, they might expect because of your friendship you're going to vote a certain way, but it's not the case.
I don't know that everybody expects that. I'm sure some do, but you got to realize, as I said, you just can't make everybody happy. So anything I decide is going to make some people happy and some people unhappy.
Sure. So you mentioned this is your second go around as chair of the Planning Commission. You sat there for the last 6 years, and you sat out 2 terms on the Traffic and Parking Commission before that, and now you're given a run for City Council. There was a time 10, 11 years ago where you threw your hat in the ring for school board, but then withdrew. What sort of makes you want to get back into the arena now, given today's political landscape has changed so much?
The timing's a lot better for me. I so enjoyed being involved with the city, and my kids were still in school, and school boards made sense for me at the time. And then there were personal reasons, family reasons, that I had to stop running. But now it makes a lot of sense for me, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, I think personally I'm very excited as well, and I know there's a lot of folks out in Beverly Hills that are too. I've got one more question for you, and it's sort of a fun bonus question, but I think I mentioned that I was watching Cable Guy prior to this interview, knowing we're going to be sitting down. Jim Carrey has a line in one of the final scenes where he references Waterworld and Kevin Costner. And I don't know if it's ever been asked to you, but was that sort of like a little fun Easter egg that you guys threw in there, having just released Waterworld the year prior?
You're observant. Yes, that was all Jim. We never would have asked him, but he thought it was very funny to reference Waterworld.
Well, I got a kick out of it too, because knowing that you had produced both films, and having that line in there, for someone that's watching it in Middle America, I don't know that they make that connection, right? And it's just you sort of have that instinctual knowledge, that knowing that you produce both. Yeah,
it's one of those things that works on 2 levels. It was sort of funny on one level, and if you knew that the 12 people besides my parents who knew that, it was even funnier.
Right. Well, Andy, I've had a lot of fun, and this was a great time to sort of sit down with you and get you back here at Beverly and talk a little bit about your success post high school. And I wish you all the luck in the world as you continue on the campaign trail here the rest of the year.
Thank you, Dillon. And I don't know if you want to. You had one question I thought was interesting, and we sort of touched on it, but. What's it like to walk back in here?
Yeah.
And how is it different?
Yeah.
I thought what's really interesting to me is I think the schools are great. I think the perception of the schools aren't what they used to be, and I think that's unfortunate. And you also mentioned something about besides the paint, and I think you hit on something there. I think the paint could use a new coat here, and they're working on that. But the schools were great. Look, when I was here, Newsweek wrote an article about the 2 best public high schools in the country, and one was New Trier in Chicago, and the other was Beverly.
Wow.
They called us honey-tan teenagers.
Yeah.
I remember that, and I still think the schools are great. My 3 kids, one went to Michigan, one went to the University of Chicago, and the other one's at NYU, and I think that says a lot for the school.
I would absolutely agree, and I know, looking back on my time here, I feel so blessed that I had the opportunity to go to such a great public school, because I don't know that there's another public school in the nation that rivals what we have here at Beverly. And we were talking before, but the education is one thing, but the network that you create having gone to school here and the kids that you meet, and often the case is people come back here and they live here because they realize how great it is. And I think that's the beauty of this high school, is the network.
100%, and one of the planks, I guess, that I'm running on is, I call it planning for the future, and I really want to create housing for younger people so they can afford to move back here. I just think that's really important. I mean, most younger people like your age, it's very tough to afford it.
It's tough to afford, yeah, and it's, it is not, there could be there's other challenges, I think, in the city, right? It's not like the sexiest place to live as a 23-year-old coming out of school.
What? Well, that's the other thing, with the subway coming, the train, the first station to open will be La Cienega in 2 years, and that's such an obvious place to build housing for younger people. And I think if you get a bunch of young people there who work downtown or whatever and take the train to work, I think the bars and the restaurants and other amenities that younger people like, and maybe it'll become Los Feliz.
We'll follow suit. Well, and you're right there on the border, right? If you're not far from West Hollywood and everything going on over there, so it does seem like a logical sort of path. Well, Andy, it's been a lot of fun. I do appreciate the time. Thanks for coming in. Yeah,
I'm honored to be your first guest.
Well, it's been great.
Hope I'm not the last.
I hope not either. Thanks again.
All right.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, Andy.
Thanks again for listening. And just a reminder, if you enjoyed this interview, hit that subscribe button, leave me a review, and tell a friend. You can also find me on social at Back to Beverly on Instagram. Till next time, I'm your host, Dillon Curtis, signing off.
Did you press record?